Hello, everyone. Welcome back to StatTech Research's seminar series on measuring progress and well-being. I'm Kelsey O'Connor, one of the organizers. Today, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Frank Martela, who will discuss how to comprehensively measure subjective well-being. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little information about our annual workshop this year from the 6th to the 7th of June. The submission window has now closed, and we are presently reviewing the abstracts. It's looking to be a good year. So if you are unable to make it, we'll plan on recording the sessions again. So you'll have a nice set of recordings to look forward to later on this year. And for those of you who can make it, that'll be great to look forward to seeing you. And back to today, Frank will speak for approximately 40 minutes and then address questions at the end, at which time please raise your virtual hands or post your questions in the chat. During the presentation, please keep your microphones muted. And a last reminder, we are recording the event. You'll be able to find this and past recordings on our website and YouTube channel. Now to introduce Frank Martela. Frank is an assistant professor at Aalto University who has specialized in the nature and determinants of well-being, with a special focus on eudaimonic well-being, meaning in life, and self-determination theory. He has several highly cited journal articles in well-respected journals, and his trade book, A Wonderful Life, has been translated into 29 languages. He has written a chapter about the determinants of Nordic well-being for the World Happiness Report, is currently the PI for a research team developing a well-being module for European Social Survey 2025, and has given interviews about Finnish happiness to the New York Times, Fox News, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, and BBC, among others. Lastly, while today we'll talk about eudaimonic well-being, Frank also has some interesting work on meaning in life, and I enjoyed a series of these videos he has released on his website, and that led me to look that much more forward to today. So without further ado, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Frank Martela. Frank, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. And great to be here and great to be able to talk about this topic that I really enjoy researching and talking about. So how should we measure, or how should we conceptualize well-being, and how should we measure it? And yeah, I guess Kelsey already gave quite good background information about me. So I'm here at Aalto University in Finland, and I guess the key publications that the present presentation is going to be based on are these ones that I've been published in collaboration with Ken Sheldon and Richard Ryan in recent years. Some of the stuff is coming from papers that I'm currently developing, but quite much comes from these three papers and also from this work at the European Social Survey, where we have been designing this well-being module, as mentioned. But let's start with a bold question. What is the ultimate aim of politics? Why do we engage in politics? What are we trying to accomplish through that? And let's give Adam Smith the opportunity to answer the question, because already a few centuries ago he said that all constitutions of government are valued only in proportion as they tend to promote the happiness of those who live under them. This is their sole use and end. So whatever, there's some background noise. So whatever government we have, since the dawn of the democratic societies, one key idea has been that what kind of justifies the existence of these governments and their ability to influence the citizens is that they should be promoting the happiness of those living under them, or well-being living under them. So that's one reason why we should care about well-being. And then a more recent reason is that recently, or one of the key challenges of our time is related to this environmental crisis that we are experiencing. And as regards that, it has been noted that at many of these planetary limits that exist, the human activity has transcended them, and we are on a path that with current consumption we are kind of not making the planet very healthy and have quite tragic outcomes to look forward to. So clearly this is something that we should do something about. But at the same time, when we're trying to decrease our footprint on the planet, we should be thinking about how should we do this in a way that still ensures the well-being of the citizens. So the researchers in this area talk about this safe and just space. So how to meet these social goals within the biophysical boundaries. So the key challenge for humanity in this way is how to produce well-being for everybody within the planetary boundaries. And if that's the challenge, then of course, like we need to produce well-being, to make sure that we actually are making citizens happy. We need to measure well-being. And currently the situation is quite much that we have standardized, quite well-developed measures to measuring like these economic indicators. We increasingly have like standardized measures for ecology, but as regards well-being, we still have some way to go to make those indicators as well-developed as these other ones. And this need to measure well-being directly has been like increasingly recognized in the last, let's say, 10 or 15 or 20 years. There has been like increasing movement towards needing to measure other progress of nations in other ways than just looking at the GDP and other economic indicators. For example, United Nations General Assembly, they had this resolution in 2011 where the conscious that the pursuit of happiness is a fundamental human goal. They stated that member states should be elaborate on additional measures that better capture the importance of pursuit of happiness and well-being. And there has been like various like these government initiatives on this topic in various countries across the world. Let's not go into them too deeply. But one key point is that, like, of course, like when we are thinking about how to measure well-being, of course, objective indicators is one way to go. We can measure people's access to food, sanitation, housing, income, employment, mortality, physical health, and so forth. But this has the danger that it's the objective indicators like that we are kind of like the experts are telling people whether they should be happy or not, whether they should have well-being or not. So if a person is miserable, even though like external conditions are good, then can the researcher or the policymaker come to say to the person, no, you should be happy in this situation. So in order to actually capture how people are doing, we also need subjective indicators. We actually need to ask from the people how they are doing in their lives. And these subjective well-being measures have been tested and examined quite much in the last decades, and they have been like found out that, okay, they correlate quite strongly and positively with outsider evaluations of the person's well-being. They are reactive in the sense that they change in the expected ways based on various life events, poverty, divorce, loneliness, unemployment, and so forth. And they are also like prospectively able to predict various objective factors related to people's health, people's mortality and longevity, people's relationship with work outcomes, and so forth. But I guess like this is like just like more background. I guess like given that you're here, you already have like some inclination to include subjective well-being measures in your thinking. But today's talk is mostly going to be focused about the question that how should we measure this subjective well-being if we see it as an important factor to be measured on a national level or in policy context. And of course, currently, the most popular way clearly is to measure life evaluation or life satisfaction. So that's kind of the standard measure in most surveys on national level, most surveys in the policy context. For example, 88% of the OECD countries have like some kind of like life satisfaction measure as part of their national well-being initiatives. And when there's like any international comparison of countries where they're put on a ranking based on their well-being or happiness, usually it's life, or almost always it's life satisfaction that is measured in these surveys. So Gallup World Poll or World Happiness Report, World Values Survey, or Eurostat comparisons of the European countries, all are based on these life satisfaction measures. But I kind of like argue that there would be like value of measuring well-being, that it's good that we measure life satisfaction. It's better that we wouldn't measure any subjective indicator. And when there's only room for one question, then yeah, life satisfaction will still be my recommendation that if we need to measure subjective well-being with one question, then let's go for life satisfaction. But still, optimally, there will be room for a bit more than one question in a survey, and then we can have this more comprehensive way of measuring subjective well-being. And I see that there's like certain added value to doing that. First, it provides this more nuanced view of well-being of individuals, of demographic groups, or of nations. For example, Felicia Huppert, they had it in this European Social Survey in 2013. They came up with this like measure of flourishing, which included 10 different indicators from this European Social Survey, that the well-being module that she was one part of the design team at that point. So competence, emotional stability, engagement, meaning, optimism, positive emotions, positive relationships, resilience, self-esteem, and vitality. And then they were like examining different European countries and showing that like different countries had like quite different profiles as regards these 10 different indicators. So of course, if you like aggregate, then you get like a certain ranking, with Denmark having the highest percentage of people who met the criterion for flourishing, and Portugal at that time having the lowest amount of population. But the figure on the right is like more interesting, because there they look at like different countries and show that that while some countries might be high on certain dimensions, other countries might be high on certain other dimensions. So that through that we can already gain like much more richer and nuanced picture of how a certain nation or citizens in a certain nation are doing. What are kind of like their pain points as regards well-being? Is it like their self-esteem, which is low? Is it about lack of social relationships? Is it about like lack of emotional stability or so forth? So compared to a situation where we only know the aggregate level or only know the life satisfaction of the people, we can say already much more based on these 10 indicators, which also means that if we want to then make an intervention in that country, if we want to improve the life satisfaction of the citizens, then having this richer picture gives much more information upon which we can then like identify what are the key factors that lead to the life satisfaction, for example, dropping. So we might imagine a situation where life satisfaction dropping, then we look at the other indicators and notice that actually positive relationships are also going down at with the same trend. So that already gives us some information that might be one key reason for why the life satisfaction is dropping, which already then makes it much easier to concentrate on some kind of like to do something about the matter. Also, like going beyond life satisfaction also shows that, for example, the impact of money on well-being, which is like there's like several studies both on national level, on that GDP per capita, but then also like within nation and on between persons, where the income is like the antecedent, and we know that then that the more money people have on average, the more they have life satisfaction. But at the same time, there seems to be like a certain point beyond which the life satisfaction doesn't increase much, or for example, in this case, in this study, they actually found even these turning points beyond which actually it was in some countries going down. But the interesting thing is when they compared like this when they had life satisfaction as the outcome compared to situation where they were looking at positive affect or negative affect, they found out that in these latter cases, the trend was again positive, but actually the satiation point came much earlier. And this correlates with other research that has shown that while income and GDP per capita can predict quite well how much life satisfaction people are experiencing, they have like much less predictive power as regards people positive feelings and negative feelings. And then, for example, this having high quality relationships, it seems to be something which is more predictive of how much positive affect people are experiencing. And then I want to just show one example from Finland, where there has been this citizen pulse survey has been going on since the start of the COVID pandemic. And here's like just one period of time. And this was like just a period of time when the Russian invasion to Ukraine starts, and Finland has like quite a long border with Russia. So it's that, of course, like affected the Finnish citizens. And as you can see here in the statistics, then the negative affect of the people, their stress levels were going up, while at the same time their positive affect and their sense of optimism was going down in the month after Russia invaded Ukraine. And at the same time, we can see like that some other factors like people's sense of relatedness, people's sense of autonomy didn't have like any, this event didn't have any effect on that. So again, like we can get a more nuanced view of what are the factors of well-being that this kind of event is impacting, and what are the factors that it actually is not impacting. And there has been also like studies examining, like, for example, voting behavior, because like we've known for like decades already like that the economic situation of a country and economic situation of people affects whether they vote on the party which is in power, or whether they vote on the opposition party. But then, for example, when there was like George Ward has this research about US presidential elections in 2016, where he and his colleague were able to show that life satisfaction was actually quite a good predictor of in which counties people voted for Trump more probably than they were voting for Republicans in previous elections. And actually it turned out that the subjective well-being was a better predictor of people's voting behavior in this election compared to any economic indicator that they were using or any demographic or geographic related indicator that they were using. But furthermore, as regards this life satisfaction, so life satisfaction was a quite good predictor of people's voting behavior, but actually it turned out that this optimism or future life satisfaction, what they predicted their life satisfaction to be 5 years from now, that was actually even better predictor of whether people would be voting for Trump in these elections. So life satisfaction gave us certain amount of predictive power, but then when we added these other measures of well-being, including this life satisfaction in 5 years from now, it turned out that we were much better able to predict people's voting behavior on a county level in the US. And then another study by Mark Fabian, he was actually looking at then sense of relatedness, and let's not go into detail, but this study was trying to show that actually it was that people experiencing worry, those people who have had high levels of relatedness, that was kind of that served as a buffer against this anxiety, and because of that they were less prone to vote for based on their racial identity. But for those people who had low levels of relatedness, then this worry led them to this so-called worldview defense, which led them to vote more along their racial identity in these elections. So again, we get, by including these other indicators of well-being in relatedness in this case, we can get a more nuanced picture of what are the reasons why people voted in a certain way in a certain election. And then I wanted just also show one recent study of mine that was just published actually a few weeks ago. And here we were looking at as regards predictive mortality based on this midlife in US survey and 23-year follow-up period. And we know separately that satisfaction with life and purpose in life both have been shown to be predicting mortality or longevity. So people who have high levels of satisfaction with life tend to live longer than people who have low levels of life satisfaction, and the same is true for purpose. But here we were pitting these two variables against each other, and it turned out that both of them had this independent predictive power as regards life satisfaction. And in this case, purpose in life actually was slightly better predictor of longevity compared to satisfaction with life. But difference was not big, but still it showed that that by including both of these indicators, we get better ability to predict people's longevity compared to just having satisfaction with life in the equation. And there were also interesting studies done in Belgium during the pandemic, where they were measuring people's sense of autonomy, competence, relatedness, these 3 basic psychological needs, and then showing how they were developing throughout the pandemic. And they were also showing that actually when they're comparing people who were vaccinating and people who were unvaccinated in this situation, it turned out that those people, because there was strong pressure to get vaccinated, then those people who were unvaccinated, actually their sense of autonomy went down compared to people who vaccinated, and also their sense of relatedness went down in this situation because they felt more excluded because of their decision in this case. So all in all, I would say that when we measure well-being beyond life satisfaction, that has few benefits. So one of them is we get this more nuanced understanding of the well-being of individuals, of certain various demographic groups or various nations. So we get much more information than when we just have this aggregate level of life satisfaction. Then as regards various outcomes, we are better able to predict those outcomes because more variance is explained through having this more comprehensive measure of well-being. And also we get this more actionable insights for how to improve well-being. So life satisfaction as such doesn't tell us much about why is it high or low, but these other indicators already give us more insights about this well-being, which is easier then to implement into action. So those are the reasons why we should be measuring well-being beyond life satisfaction. But then the next question is then, what are the kind of key dimensions that we should be measuring in that situation? And as said, this life satisfaction is by far the most common way of measuring well-being. But at the same time, this positive and negative affect is also like relatively common, complementary to support this evaluative well-being. So for example, half of the OECD countries with these national well-being initiatives are also measuring positive and negative affect. And those measures tend to be like relatively standardized as well. Not as standardized as this life satisfaction measure, but there's relatively good understanding how to measure those. But then there's also this like third dimension, like sometimes called eudaimonic well-being, sometimes called functional well-being. And this is like quite often recommended that this should be included in these measures of well-being. For example, like OECD guidelines say that we should be measuring this third dimension. US National Research Council was recommending this. European Union Expert Group of Quality of Life were also recommending this. And many OECD countries also include at least some measure of this eudaimonic dimension. But the key problem with this third dimension of well-being is that we actually, there's quite little consensus about what should be measured when we are thinking about this third dimension. And actually there's even like, we lack even consensus about what we should be calling it. So sometimes it's called eudaimonia, sometimes it's called eudaimonic well-being, sometimes it's psychological functioning, sometimes it's positive functioning. And these different labels seem to be used quite interchangeably to describe this something more than life satisfaction and positive and negative affect. And together with Ken and Sheldon, we were looking at these various more popular measures of eudaimonic well-being, and we were able to identify like 63 different separate elements that has been part of at least one of these various ways of operationalizing eudaimonic well-being. So we were like arguing that it's clearly like this, that this ever-expanding number of constructs become encased within an increasingly ambiguous concept. So because of that, we need like some consensus. We need like something to narrow this down. So we cannot have like measure all of these. We need to have like some idea about what are the key elements that actually should be measured when we are measuring something more than life satisfaction and positive and negative affect. And what that should be, then I can argue that the subjective well-being is an important part of well-being. So it's about like these general evaluations and experiences we have of life, and this life satisfaction and these mood states are key part of that. But then the other key part of well-being is about psychological functioning. And here the argument is that there's like certain psychological factors which are so important for human well-being as to deserve to be studied as independent indicators of well-being as such, so that they're so close or so central to the well-being, so close to the core of it, that we should be actually increasing them in whatever way we are measuring well-being. So it's like and this psychological function is kind of like trying to explain why the person is feeling good and bad. So subjective well-being can tell us like whether people are feeling good or bad, but psychological functioning already tells like a bit more about why people are feeling good and bad, and thus they also like build on a more substantial account of human nature. So saying that that subjective well-being is important, it's saying that okay, people are evaluative creatures, people are creatures who have emotions, which is like something we probably all can agree on. But then when we go into the psychological functioning, then we already need to like have like a more elaborate theory about what are the key elements of being a human. And just a few words about why I call it psychological functioning instead of like eudaimonic well-being. So I think like I haven't, even though I have been like doing quite much research around eudaimonic well-being, actually don't like the label so much. One reason is that it doesn't like actually fit very well with like how Aristotle and these other ancient Greek philosophers were thinking about eudaimonia in their time. So the way they were thinking about it, eudaimonia was more this like label for life going well in general. So it's more about like good life. Better translation for it will be like good life or flourishing or something like that, rather than subjective well-being, or like rather than like something more specific. So it's like it's not some alternative to subjective well-being, but rather if you read, for example, Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, you will find that he's actually discussing whether these hedonic feelings are part of eudaimonia. So it's not something that there will be like hedonic well-being and eudaimonic well-being, but rather for them, eudaimonia was this broader concept that included many other things than emotions and people's feelings. And then one part of this broader concept of eudaimonia then might be subjective well-being. And the second reason I don't like this eudaimonic well-being label so much is that in modern psychology, it has become this like catch-all category for all things related to well-being. So everything which is related to well-being, which is not life satisfaction, positive affect, or negative affect, that can be labeled as eudaimonic well-being. So whether we are talking about optimism, whether we are talking about autonomy as a basic needs, whether we are talking about resilience or whatever, all of this is like called eudaimonia because like as long as it's not part of this subjective well-being as such. So it's kind of like too broad and ambiguous construct to be used as a scientific category. And because of that, then I like this psychological functioning because it has like then already a bit more clear definition what should be part of it and what should not be part of it. And then if we take this psychological functioning as one key category of well-being, then I would kind of like argue that psychological needs is one part of it that we should like recognize. So if we try to like identify what are the specific experiences that consistently and robustly lead to beneficial outcomes, such as well-being, personal growth, and integrity, then these basic psychological needs, if there's something like basic psychological needs for human beings, then at least they should be part of this or at the core of this psychological functioning. And this, of course, quite much comes from this self-determination theory, where basic psychological needs is defined as these innate psychological nutriments that are essential for ongoing psychological growth, integrity, and well-being. And Richard Ryan and Edward Deci, they're arguing that if something is a need, it must have like a direct relationship to well-being. So when it's satisfied, it should promote well-being, and when it's thwarted, it should lead to various negative consequences. And one good thing about these psychological needs is that there exist these clear criteria. So for what to include in psychological needs, and through that also to psychological functioning, and what should be not included in there. So we can like throw in various candidates, and then where we look at the criteria, and we can look at these criteria like empirically, and then we can make the decisions about like what are the candidates which have the strongest empirical backing, and then choose those as to be part of functional well-being. And the key criteria for psychological needs include that satisfaction should be leading to well-being, frustration of the need should be leading to various indicators of ill-being, and chronic satisfaction, if it's like constantly satisfied, that should have like various long-term functional benefits. Furthermore, it should be like something that like is quite well able to explain why various environmental factors, various environmental influences is having well-being benefits on people. And empirically, this means that it's actually this mediating factor, something that mediates the influence of various environmental factors on indicators of subjective well-being, such as life satisfaction. Then, of course, the last criteria is that given that it's like psychological need, something part of the human nature, then of course it should be like operational across cultures, not something that is only found in certain cultures or certain countries, but something that should have the same effects on well-being and ill-being, no matter the cultural context. And self-determination theory argues that there's basically these three needs that has been like that have accumulated enough evidence that they can be called basic psychological needs. So this autonomy as this sense of volition and internal locus of causality, that one is like endorsing one's activities, finding them something that I might personally want to do, rather than something that is forced upon me from other people or from like various external influences. Then this sense of competence, which is about this sense of effectiveness, sense of mastery, and sense of growth. So people feel that they somehow able to accomplish things in their life. They are talented, or they get things done when they want to get them done. And then also recognizing this social nature of human beings, this sense of relatedness, about sense of being connected to and cared for by others. So feeling that other people around me somehow care about me and I care about them. I have these high quality relationships with them. And within self-determination theory, there has been like quite much research around these topics, and this like the link between these needs and well-being has been established in quite numerous studies. For example, there was this recent systematic review of STD-related meta-analysis, so kind of like this meta-review of meta-analysis, And there they were able to identify 12 different meta-analyses that were only concentrating on basic psychological needs in various contexts, such as work, elderly people, athletes, and so forth. Also, the main results have been replicated in cross-cultural studies, and there has been like these longitudinal three-wave studies that have been able to demonstrate that they are mediating factors between various environmental conditions and people's sense of subjective well-being. So the role of psychological needs in well-being is kind of like in a picture. We could like look at it like this: that there's like the subjective well-being, and then there's this psychological functioning, and within the psychological functioning, then this basic psychological needs have this like quite prominent position. So when there's like various environmental influences, one key reason why they lead to higher life satisfaction, higher positive affect, less negative affect, is when they're like able to satisfy people's needs for autonomy, competence, or relatedness. So it's kind of like important to notice that the psychological needs here play a kind of like a double function in this account of well-being. So because they are like something that stem from the human nature, something that is part of the human makeup, they're crucially important dimensions of well-being as such. So something that we should be measuring whether people are consciously value them or not, because like research has also shown that the effects that these need satisfaction has on well-being is not like much affected by how much people consciously value these needs. So even people who actually don't strive for autonomy tend to benefit from having higher levels of autonomy. So they're like important as such, but at the same time, they also function as these key mediators between various environmental influences and subjective well-being. So they help to explain why life satisfaction is high or low. So I guess like this basic psychological needs, I think like we can make a relatively strong case that these basic psychological needs should be part of this functional well-being. But then more tentatively, I might also like suggest that like another dimension of this functional well-being might be like certain types of attitudes that people might have towards their life or towards themselves. So quite often when we have these lists of more comprehensive well-being, there's like certain attitudes that seem to be part of this list. So for example, optimism, mindfulness, self-esteem, compassion, all of these have been like included in various lists of more comprehensive accounts of well-being. And kind of like the key difference between these basic psychological needs and these, which we may call basic functional attitudes, is that basic psychological needs are kind of like the endowments we get from our interaction with the environment, while these basic functional attitudes are kind of like beliefs and expectations we have towards the environment. So it's not about something we get from the environment, but more about how we approach that environment in the first place. And here we can also build these empirical criteria for how to identify something, because of course there's like plethora of various attitudes that could be suggested to be basic functional attitudes, but like quite mirroring these criteria for basic needs, we might argue that these attitudes needs to be something that having those attitudes should be consistently and causally connected to positive subjective well-being, and also like linked to long-term subjective well-being and behavioral functioning in life. And again, they should be like universal in the sense of applying to all human beings, no matter the cultural context. It's because some attitudes might be functional in a certain cultural context, but we want to identify those attitudes that seem to be beneficial for human beings, whatever the cultural context. And here, kind of, there hasn't been like any systematic empirical research program, and nothing similar to what has been done as regards these basic psychological needs. So this is very tentative, but like at least like this, I would argue that this optimism, mindfulness, self-esteem, all of them, compassion, all of them might be something that could be argued to be at least like relatively good candidates to be included in the list. And all of them are also like very like general things that they capture an attitude towards something that is like quite generally important for human beings. So optimism about how we approach the future, mindfulness is how we approach the present, self-esteem or self-compassion is how we approach ourselves, and then compassion or pro-social is about how we approach others. So all of them are like quite kind of like fundamental things about human existence, is like how we approach future, present, ourselves, and others. But yeah, so but at this point I might just like say that these might be interesting candidates, but establishing any exact list is a task for the future. But to return to this picture, then this basic functional attitudes will be then like this other category within this broader concept of psychological functioning. So this is kind of like my current kind of like thinking of when we are like trying to come up with like some indicators, or trying to come up what are the kind of key indicators of subjective well-being. Then I would argue that these are the categories that we should be looking at. So the subjective well-being, including this affective well-being and evaluative well-being, and then this psychological functioning, which includes these basic psychological needs and basic functional attitudes. And this is actually also the kind of like the thinking that we have in this this model that we have been building for this European Social Survey well-being module. So with Antonella Delefave, Mark Fabian, and Gundik Nies, we have been thinking about this. And this is kind of like the model that we use there to categorize the concepts that we want to measure in this well-being module. So the labels are slightly different here. So here we call them mental resources, these basic functional attitudes, but otherwise it's the same model. And kind of few implications of thinking about well-being through this kind of model is that one thing to notice, like, because meaning in life is typically taken as one key indicator of eudaimonic well-being. So quite often when we measure eudaimonic well-being, what we are actually measuring is meaning in life or purpose in life. So for example, the UK has this like 4 indicators for subjective well-being, and one of them is like this life evaluation, then they have positive affect, negative affect, and then the 4th one is about the eudaimonic well-being indicator is about purpose and meaning in life. But I'm going to like argue that like if in this categorization, actually this meaning in life will be not on the like left side of this picture, but as one additional type of evaluative well-being. So life satisfaction is one general evaluation we can make about our lives as a whole, but meaning in life is another type of general evaluation we can make about our lives as a whole. So the most natural place for meaning in life is not in psychological functioning, but actually as additional indicator of evaluative well-being. But I guess like the exact elements within each category is not like kind of like the main point I'm trying to make today. For example, this list that we have in this European Social Survey module, this is partly constrained by the history because it's like a repetitive module, so we have to repeat quite many of the questions from the previous round, and because of that, then we have to also categorize them within this picture. But having these categories, I think that's like something that brings structure to this, like to our thinking about well-being, and especially when we try to think it in a more comprehensive way. And also it gives it like this empirical criteria to this like typically very ambiguous construct and context of this more the 3rd dimension of well-being and this more eudaimonic dimension of well-being. And then I just like, very briefly I mentioned that in this like European Social Survey model, we also like included social well-being as an additional dimension, because we argue that, okay, it's important to focus on personal well-being, how people are doing as themselves, but because we are social animals, how we relate to other people has some like, important value and importance beyond our personal well-being. And because that is quite important, also focus on social well-being, which is more about like the in-between human beings, not about how well I'm doing, how I'm feeling about my relationship, but how people in general are relating to each other, which is like then quite important part of, for example, this social sustainability. So in this like European Social Survey well-being module, we also include this indicator for social well-being, such as respect, discrimination, social cohesion, safety, loneliness. So these kind of indicators as well. But that's like not the main topic. I just wanted to very briefly mention that. So to conclude, I think like one indicator is not enough to cover the regions of subjective well-being. So I mentioned these reasons why I think like that. So we are better able to predict various outcomes. We get like more predictive power through that. We get richer picture, and then we also get like this more actionable insights about how to then subsequently increase people's well-being. At the same time, I argue that this standardization of well-being indicators is very important, because like only that gives us this like comparability across times, across contexts, across nations, and also like helps to build this more cumulative science of well-being. Because now the situation that one indicator or one one indicator of eudaimonic well-being might be measuring these concepts, another might be measuring completely different concepts. So even though both are called eudaimonic well-being, then we cannot generalize from the findings of one to the other because they're actually measuring different things. So because of that, we need this standardization. And as regards to standardization, I think for life satisfaction, for positive and negative affect, they are already relatively standardized, but these more functional dimensions need still quite much more work. And the key step towards the standardization that I'm proposing here is that if we have this, instead of this broader and more ambiguous eudaimonic well-being, we have this we focus on functional well-being, then we can have these these two sub-dimensions which have these more clear empirical criteria for what to include there. So these basic psychological needs and these basic functional attitudes. And to close with a quote from Richard Ryan and Edward Desi, I say that why this is important is that because how we define and measure well-being, that influences our practices of government, teaching, therapy, parenting, preaching, as all such endeavors aim to change humans for the better, and thus it requires some vision of what that better is. So it's important to be quite careful about what indicators we use, because that actually has quite big practical implications of what are actually things that we are then trying to advance. So that's all for the presentation, but I look forward to the discussion next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. That's very interesting. A lot of new information for me. Everyone, please feel free to raise your virtual hands. You can unmute yourself at that time and ask a question. I think, Joe, you were up first. So, Joe, feel free.
I'm trying to activate my video. Oh, there it is. This is a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate what you've done, Frank. This is really good. Your distinction between subjective well-being and psychological functioning, and how the work of your work and Richard Ryan and Edward Deci contribute to our understanding of basic psychological functioning, basic psychological needs, and how that fits in, and ultimately those mental resources dimensions that you talked about, and ultimately your distinctions within subjective well-being in terms of affective and evaluative. And then finally, you're introducing social well-being. Social well-being is a very, very interesting and I think equally important dimension. But I have a feeling that it was almost like an afterthought. You included it at the very end, and I think it's much more important, and it should play a much more prominent role in the overall scheme of things. The work of the medical sociologist of Corey Keyes on positive mental health should be highlighted in this kind of research. I hope you pay a lot more attention to it. Corey Keyes talked about social acceptance, social actualization, social contribution, social integration, social harmony. These dimensions are so important in the broader sense. It would allow us to sort of expand the concept of personal well-being into what you call social well-being. He calls it social well-being. I call it socio-eudaimonia. That might be actually a better word for it. But again, I congratulate you for this wonderful presentation, and you've done us a great favor in terms of making those distinctions very explicit. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And of course, I agree that this social well-being is an important dimension. Of course, it's a bit like a matter of emphasis. What are the things to focus on in a presentation? I cannot go into all things. So I wanted to include that in the end, even though it's true that I didn't talk much about that. So it was kind of a more just an afterthought or a kind of side note that beyond this personal well-being, we should also be thinking about these more social dimensions of well-being. And of course, sometimes, but I can argue that sometimes the distinction is a bit hard to also maintain between this personal well-being and social well-being, because I can argue that this people's sense of relatedness towards other. That's like part of our personal well-being. So my own personal well-being is quite much affected by whether I feel that people care about me. But at the same time, the social well-being as a concept, I think that it's more about kind of like how I perceive the social situation more generally. Do people trust each other? Do people care about each other? And these kind of like more general perceptions that people have about the social situation. And I would argue that when we measure these things, of course, there are something that probably has a quite significant influence also on the personal well-being. So we know that, for example, trust, those nations where people trust other people are nations where people tend to have like higher levels of personal well-being, higher levels of life satisfaction. So there's like quite an intimate connection between how people are personally doing and how the social fabric of the society or of the neighborhood is doing. And because of that, it's quite important to pay attention also to this social fabric.
Thank you.
Selma, you're up next. Thanks.
Hi. Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. It's very beautiful clarity of ideas and sort of in concepts. So it's been really interesting to watch. I had a couple of small points. So one is, I don't know if you come across the model that NEF put forward, New Economics Foundation put forward in 2008, which we call the dancing man, which just because the model looked like a man who was dancing. But it's very similar to the model you've got for the ESS, except for we tried to have a little bit more sort of structure into the difference between the psychological resources, and the functioning. And I'm just curious, like you didn't mention it explicitly in the traits, sorry, in the criteria, but I just wonder if the trait state distinction is important there, because I think we would expect that these attitudes that you've mentioned, these basic functional attitudes, have less temporal variability and are less influenced by one's context, whereas the functioning is more affected by the context and is more affected by and it should be more variable. So that's one thing. And then the second question is, and I was just reading your paper, your 2023 paper today, where you talk about, why meaning is not in the eudaimonia box, but it's rather an evaluative measure. And I don't think, but I'll be interested, correct me if you're wrong, I don't think you're based on empirical evidence, right? Because I haven't seen a test of whether meaning meets those 5 criteria you mentioned. Functioning, I mean, is it universal? Does it have a positive impact on sort of the other subjective well-being, that kind of stuff? So it'd be interesting if that has been done. It'd be interesting to hear about that. And just bearing in mind that you're saying it's an evaluation of meaning and therefore it fits in the evaluative box, but to be honest, all the questions people ask are evaluative. You're evaluating your sense of autonomy, you're evaluating your sense of relatedness. So I don't think that's a good enough reason to put it in the evaluative box, and I'd be interested to hear if you've got some more reasons. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, as we got this New Economic Foundation, yeah, I think I probably have read like most of your publications regarding this topic, but no, don't like remember exactly this dancing model. I have to like look at it again. But as regard this, yeah, this like the threat state thing, I think like you're right that these attitudes, like if they're basic attitudes, that then they should be like relatively stable. So like people, of course, like easy to be optimist in a situation where everything is well, but this optimism should be then like more. If it's a threat, it should be something that people are able to maintain even in tougher situations, to actually, because those are the situations where you might need it the most. So and in contrast, this psychological need satisfaction might be more like state kind of thing, that it might be like changing from one context to another. So one might have like high levels of autonomy when one is in one's hobbies, but then one goes to work and actually the sense of autonomy is very low in there, and then in some other work tasks actually it might be higher again. So in that sense, that there might be like more variability as regards this need satisfaction compared to these attitudes. Then as we got this question about this meaning and its place in this model. So I guess like the reason that I would put it in this evaluative well-being, it's true that it's more like it's a more theoretical or conceptual argument rather than like empirical argument, because sometimes it's like hard to like empirically probably make this distinction in some situations, but it's more about like that. I would say that the meaning evaluation is like this very general. So these basic psychology needs usually they tend to tell like a bit more something more specific about your relationship with the environment. So autonomy tells that you feel like that there's like enough that there's enough freedom and volition in the environment. Competence tells that you're able to like effectively navigate in the environment. While this meaning, when it's like very general evaluation, like does your life as such feel meaningful, or do you find value in your life, or does your life feel significant? Those are like so general evaluations that it's hard to say that doesn't tell anything specific about your world in the same sense as this life satisfaction. It doesn't tell anything specific. It just tells generally that you're satisfied or unsatisfied with your life as a whole. So yeah, it's not empirical thing, but it's more kind of like conceptual argument why it should be there rather than as one of the needs. And I know that there has been like people who have like suggested that meaning should be counted as one basic psychological needs, and there's few papers that are trying to make that argument also.
Great. Thanks, Frank. Sophia, you were up next.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I similarly, I think, can say that I learned a lot. And I think my question was about whether you feel that there is a tension in your work, and maybe generally in all of our work, right? When we try to understand what well-being means for individual people. Something that you said that I wrote down that I really liked is you said that, our well-being measures should reflect what it means to be human. And humans are sense-making organisms, right? Which means that what we take as good functioning or as well-being is completely different, from person to person, from culture to culture. So it seems like there's this tension between being respectful to what an individual takes to be good functioning, and then this idea and this desire of ours to create a universal measure, like life satisfaction, or even now taking something that is, psychological positive functioning and then turning it into something universal. So I was curious whether you see this tension as well, and whether you think that, we should continue on and really try to find these factors that are truly universal across individuals, or whether you think that there's some room for maybe mid-level theories of well-being, right? Something that takes into account that people may view what it means to be human, what it means to be a positive functioning human differently.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And actually, that's something this Mark Fabian, who has been part of the same team in this European Social Survey, our well-being module, that's something that we have been discussing quite much with him, because he had been like collaborating with this, I think, Anna Alexandrova, who's this like philosopher who has been exactly arguing that, instead of these universal theories of well-being, we should pay more attention to these more local mid-level theories of well-being, like go among certain group of people and then like discuss with them what is well-being for you, and based on that then generate these more local understandings of well-being instead of these universal understandings. So I think that there definitely is room for these kind of like mid-level or more local theories of well-being that are generated together with the people that are affected by this measure or whatever it's like then produced out of that. But at the same time, we also need these more universal indicators, because like that's something that then makes possible this like advancement of well-being on a national level, for example, because like even within the nation there might be like various local theories of well-being, but at the same time like kind of at least we should strive to identify what are kind of the most universal elements of well-being. So of course, like some of them might be like more, some of them might have like more better evidence behind them that they actually are universal. Some of them might have like more local variation, how much people value them, how much it affects their well-being and so forth. But at least like that's something that we should be striving for, because like then if you're able to identify elements which most people across the world find somehow like valuable, then that makes possible this comparison between different contexts and comparison between different cultures, and then also makes possible to then have these initiatives to increase people's well-being. Because of course, like if we cannot agree what well-being is, then it's hard to like increase that situation. So yeah, that there is like definitely this tension between this narrow set of universal indicators and then these more local indicators created together with the people. But I think like in the end we need both of those. That's like kind of my thinking that yeah, both of them are needed, and we cannot like only have one of them, but we need to like somehow trying to develop both.
Real quick follow-up before Johnson, you're up next. So there's a lot of initiatives to ask about what perceived well-being means to different groups of people. So we have these various initiatives in countries like the UK. They asked people before they developed the ONS4. The SDGs were created in part through public consultation. So do you know of any types, any similar activities for psychological functioning? If you asked people what would they say they need for psychological functioning, or what does that represent for them? And this might get at differences in different countries that Sophia is referring to, or within population groups within a country.
That's a good question. Probably not, because I guess I said like this life satisfaction, these kind of measures, they're like clearly like the more developed ones, the ones that have been like used much more, and also which have been in research more, and they have been like more, or this Mark has been like involved in this cognitive interview when people are asked like when you answer these life satisfaction questions, what are you actually answering? What are your thoughts when you do that? So I think that that's something that also should be like done for these categories of functional well-being. But at the same time, I think that this functional well-being as such is probably like more a scientific category than like this everyday category. So we can ask people like about their happiness, and they probably have like some layman theory of what happiness is for them, but they wouldn't have like this like layman understanding of functional well-being, because that's a concept that is not used in everyday language. So in that sense, like if we do that, these kind of tasks, it should be like done for these individual elements. So ask about people about autonomy. What does autonomy mean for you, or what does competence mean for you? And that kind of work definitely should be done. But I guess like then this functional well-being as such is more just like a label for this certain types of well-being indicators or certain types of well-being constructs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Johnson, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Frank, for your presentation. At first, I got a little bit lost because the last time I had heard about and used the word psychological needs was in Maslow's theory of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in that hierarchy, I see that psychological needs are actually at the bottom. But then you quickly introduced basic psychological needs, and I'm under the impression that in this context, you use it in a different way, not in the way it is used in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maybe you can throw some light about that. Then one other question that just maybe if you could educate me more a little bit. You presented these various dimensions. You made an argument that overall life satisfaction has its own its own inadequacies in regards to maybe variation, and we cannot capture comprehensiveness. And you presented these dimensions, and I wonder if these dimensions, you view them as if they are reflective or they are formative of well-being. And after presenting the dimensions, I have a feeling that you left me hanging because I was waiting for maybe something like an aggregation or something like this, because at the end of the day, while they are important dimensions, but yes, we could have some overlapping aspects, but it looks like each dimension captures a certain aspect of well-being that the other dimension may not capture. So then we lose the comprehensiveness that we were talking about in the first place. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for this question. So yeah, as regards this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think like first Maslow's work has been like this very important pioneering work as regards this our thinking about psychological needs and the thinking about human needs in general. But I guess like it's true that like my own presentation is more based on this self-determination theory, which has been like which has kind of like their own theory of needs, which has of course like quite many similarities to Maslow. But like for example, Maslow focuses or emphasizes more this motivational component of these needs. That needs are something that when people are lacking them, that motivates them. While this self-determination theories argue that even though people might be motivated by these things as well, the most important criteria for something being a need is their impact on their well-being. So people might not always like be motivated by these needs, but that's not the main point. But it's more about like whether the satisfaction of that need leads to well-being, and also in situations where people actually are not striving for that need. So that's like one key difference between kind of like how Maslow conceptualizes needs and how self-determination theory conceptualizes needs. And then of course the list of needs itself is quite different as well. And then the other question about this, whether this is like this reflective or formative, I would probably say that it's more like a formative measure, because like the idea is not that these should be like correlated as highly as possible with each other, but it's kind of like saying that these are the factors that are important for well-being, and we should measure them all. Some of them might be like more highly correlated with that, but probably they're all more or less correlated with each other positively. But like that's not the kind of like that's not the criterion for why we choose them, that they should be like very closely tied. But like some factors might be have a bit lower correlation with each other, but still we might argue that they're like so central dimension that they should be included in the broader concept of well-being. So in that sense, it's a more formative theory of well-being. And as regards the implications, but so I guess like of course so I tried like then that I guess like in this European social survey we are trying to create like indicators for each of these dimensions, and then with new data we are then able to more look at like what is like the added value of each of these dimensions together, and what can we like then get from that. So we that's something for future research to actually like then examine how they interact with each other. Of course, like there's much research about each of the individual component, but like if this is some model that one wants to propose, then we should also like look at them together, and that's something for future work.
Thanks, Frank. So we've gone over time, but I think we have one more question in the chat. And then if anybody else has a question, please raise your hand now and we'll see if we can get to it. Feng Yu, if you would like, you can ask your question.
So it's like this, in the chat I see this one question about
Sorry, Frank, it sounds like Feng Yu, your microphone's not working. No, are you muted? It looks okay. Sorry, what I'll do, I'll go ahead and ask the question. Feng Yu's a colleague in my office, and we're trying to work this out, but I'll go for it. So Feng Yu actually used to work at the Eudaimonic Institute and has some familiarity with this Aristotelian approach, and says that the original definition of eudaimonia involves living a virtuous life focusing on growth, meaning, authenticity, and excellence. And her question is, how would you relate virtues from Aristotle's perspective to psychological functioning? Are they more related to basic psychological needs or functional attitudes?
Yeah, because like it's some time since I last time read this like this Nicomachean Ethics, so I don't remember like all the details about Aristotle's like theory. But of course, like it's true that he was like more focused on this virtuous living as a way towards eudaimonia. So he was like going through various possible ways of like defining eudaimonia. Then he came up with the probably the best way is then like live according to virtue, and given human nature, then especially like this our capacity for rationality is something that sets us apart from other animals, and because of that then focusing on that. So actually I think like this growth, meaning, authenticity, and excellence, I would actually say that that's not Aristotle's theory. So it's like probably I remember some like more modern psychologists have like proposed as coming from Aristotle, but actually it's like this authenticity. I think that's like actually a concept that wouldn't have existed in ancient Greek times. So authenticity is more like this quite a modern notion rather than something that would have been part of that kind of discussion. So in that sense, this growth and excellence, I would argue that those will be part of Aristotle's list of virtues, but meaning and authenticity probably are more modern things that wouldn't make sense to people living at that time. So I guess like then living according to this virtue, if that's something that if your attitude is that I'm living according to certain virtues, I strive for excellence or I strive for growth, those of course sound mostly like these basic psychological attitudes. So they're like not needs, but they're so this Aristotelian theory of virtuous living would then like if that would be translated into certain functional attitudes probably. That's like how I would then like think about that. But of course, I would need to reread Aristotle to remember exactly how his ideas went.
Thanks, Frank. So I have, I hope, a very quick question. To what extent are these basic psychological needs traits, and how much do they change over time? I imagine certain contexts, it's fairly obvious, but for an individual, do we have, let's say, panel data on individuals' feeling of autonomy, relatedness, competence? Do we see meaningful change within people?
Yeah, there's like, of course, I think that there's quite much meaningful change within people, and of course, like between different contexts, that the same person evaluating their life in a certain context might like evaluate it quite differently from another context, and of course, like different when life situations change, that can have like quite a big impact. So in the present, I had like this one slide about this autonomy and relatedness during the pandemic time in Belgium, and there we saw that that these restrictions had an effect on people's sense of autonomy, and then also this, as regards these unvaccinated people, that not vaccinating oneself in a society, but that requires people to vaccinate, had an effect on people's sense of autonomy in the subsequent months. So in that sense, those are not, I wouldn't say that they are like not so like threat-like things, they're more like state-like things. And of course, like people's life conditions tend to stay most of the time relatively stable. So of course, they're like big changes might be rare, but sometimes if the life conditions change significantly, then people's evaluation of how much they experience autonomy, competence, relatedness might also change quite dramatically.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much. If you have any last words for us, otherwise we'll shut it down.
No, thanks for like excellent questions. It's always great to be able to talk about these issues with other people who are excited about this topic as well and have asked these relevant questions about the topic. Thanks for everybody
Great, thank
for
you.
joining.
You have a couple of thanks in the chat as well. And yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think we all do. And thanks to the audience members as well. Have a good night.
Yeah, thanks and have a good day too.